Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jody Bromberg, and I am the CEO of Interfaith Family. And I have to tell you, I'm going to get choked up here. It is great to see all of you here this morning, to look out and see all of these faces and people. This national convening has been a long time coming. A year ago, when Interfaith Family founder Ed Case was stepping down from his role as CEO, and we were going through the transition, and we were honoring him for the first time with our first major event, he was adamant about it that we hold not just a party, but that there be a learning piece of this. And so we planned at that point, about a year ago, an afternoon of learning and a reception, and we had this really incredible response. And people showed up, and they didn't just show up, they showed up with their full selves, with their whole selves. And they were engaged, and they talked, and they argued, and they really wanted to engage on this topic. And so when our board met the next morning at its annual retreat, it was clear to everyone in the room that the time had come to create a national gathering, a day-long space, where Jewish communal professionals, clergy, funders, philanthropists, thought leaders, in essence, all of you who are here today, to come together to talk about the most pressing issue that is facing Jewish continuity and Jewish life today, to figure out what are the next steps needed to engage interfaith families effectively in Jewish life. Now, I will tell you this. I was just telling Leslie Mata this a few minutes ago. We are a small organization, and we are not set up to do big events like this. Up until about a month ago, we had no development staff, and we don't have a full-time event planner, and we have no dedicated conference planning staff. And so this undertaking pushed us to our very max. But what we do have is organizational guts. We're entrepreneurial, and we're agile, and we're not afraid to work really, really hard. And so we did what any good business, nonprofit or not, would do. We took advantage of the needs in the marketplace and responded to them, and decided that as the organization dedicated to supporting and advocating on behalf of interfaith families and couples in Jewish life, that we would create the Interfaith Opportunity Summit, a convening that is meant not to focus on the negativity that often surrounds this issue and this topic, but rather instead the opportunity before all of us, the incredible opportunity to meet the needs of interfaith families, a diverse, a complex, a not easily pigeonholed group that includes many of us here in the room and many more who are not in the room today and not part of this national conversation. So all of you showed up. You showed your interest in planning and participating in being here, and I am so glad that you did. I'm so glad that you took the time out of what I know is a very busy time, particularly after the holidays, to lend your thoughts, your spirit, your voice to today's conversation. And my hope is that you leave today with one or two nuggets, one or two thoughts or ideas, or maybe even actions about how you or the organization that you work with will work on this important issue. And forgive me for saying this. I hope that one of those nuggets is a national, wide-scale, coordinated effort on the topic of engaging interfaith families in Jewish life in the same way that coordinated efforts have been undertaken on other important topics, like Jewish day schools, like Jewish summer camps. This topic is complicated, it's hard work, but it deserves that. It deserves that attention, it deserves that focus. We deserve that. Today is a good start, but it is not the end. This is the beginning. Now, before I introduce our first speaker, I have a couple of housekeeping items and rules. The first is that this is a controversial area still, and people come at this from wildly different views. And one of our values at Interfaith Family is radical acceptance and radical inclusivity and radical kindness. And so I hope that today here, you will also choose to be accepting and kind to one another, even as you hold wildly disparate views, maybe. 2, our schedule is incredibly packed. We have filled 50 pounds of programming in the proverbial 25-pound bag. And so we are going to hew very, very closely to our schedule and timing and start and end everything on schedule. And I hope that you will help us do that. You're off to a great start. Good job. 3, we are videotaping today's sessions, and we may put them on Interfaith Family's website or YouTube channel. And so keep that in mind, that if you ask a question or make a comment, you'll be on video. That wasn't supposed to be cautionary, but it sort of ended up that way. 4, we'll be taking questions in the first plenary with written cards, and then in the subsequent plenaries and sessions, the old-fashioned way with people raising their hands and using mics. And because we're recording, be sure to wait for the mic to come over to you before you start talking. And then 5, if you haven't already, download our app guidebook. There are materials for the sessions there, additional documents and evaluation forms, list of attendees, the schedule. And we are committed to being environmentally friendly and budget friendly, so we've gone as paperless as possible today. And I would be remiss if I didn't just take a moment to say thank you here to our national staff who have been working so tirelessly, particularly Heather Martin, Liz Pillay-Wettengale, Deb Morandi, Jamie Cooperman, Mike Novisky, and Andrea Kremer, and especially Founder Ed Case, who has worked so hard and put together such an incredible program today. Thank you. Thank you. So, and now, on to our first speaker. The Pew Research Center's 2013 report, A Portrait of Jewish Americans, referred to everyone as the Pew Report, came out on October 1st, 2013. Now, I know that because, incidentally, it's also the first day on the job as the president of Interfaith Family. So today I remember. It generated huge discussion about the future of Jewish life and Jewish community in the United States, including its headline that 71% of non-Orthodox Jews who got married since 2000 were marrying someone of a different faith. So I am especially honored and pleased to introduce one of the authors of the Pew Report and the deputy director of the Pew Research Center, who will be here and help set the stage for our conversation by rooting us in the demographics of intermarriage discussed in the Pew Report and Pew's research since. So please join me and give a warm welcome to Alan Cooperman. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Deb and Heather. Really a great honor to speak to you today. And I want to compliment those, just picking up from what Jody said, and I hope I don't break the furniture here. Very, very well-organized conference, and an enormous amount of thought and passion went into the planning of it. I have only a few minutes to speak, so I'm going to go fairly quickly over a fair amount of data, and I may lose some of you, but I'll be available to try to help afterwards as well. I want to let you know, first and foremost, that today, in conjunction with this conference, the Pew Research Center has released a new report. It actually came out at 9 o'clock this morning, just timed deliberately. The report is called 1 in 5 U.S. adults were raised in religiously mixed homes. It's not a report specifically about Jewish interfaith families. It's a report about American interfaith families. And if I might interject, and I'm going to walk around here to the front, this could very well be called Embracing the New American Reality. So I'm going to get into some of those numbers, but I also want to, I'm cognizant of your interest, particularly in Jewish matters. And so I'm going to share first some Jewish numbers. Now, some of these may be familiar to you from the 2013 report. And the first thing just to note, just so we're clear on our terms, that in that report we made a distinction between Jews by religion, that's people who say their faith is Judaism. You ask them what their religion is, they say they're Jewish. And those who identify as Jewish and who have a Jewish parent, at least one Jewish parent, but who don't necessarily identify with the Jewish faith, though they also don't identify with any other faith. These are not Christians or Buddhists or Hindus. They are people who have no particular religion or atheist or agnostic and think of themselves as Jewish and have a Jewish parent. And today in the United States, or as of 2013 in the United States, our estimate is about 1 in 5 American Jews fall into that Jews of no religion category. And we also know that generationally, the share of each recent generation that falls into that category has been rising. So roughly a third of Jews in the millennial generation are these Jews of no religion. And that's important for a variety of reasons, that distinction, but one way in which it's particularly important is that Jews by religion and Jews of no religion are raising their children differently. And you probably remember some of these numbers from the 2013 report, so very quickly I'll go over them again. Jews by religion, 71% of them in our survey who have minor children at home are raising their children in the Jewish faith and only in the Jewish faith. Reading across that top line, an additional 15% are raising their children partly Jewish and partly something else. An additional 7% are raising their children either Jewish culturally but not religiously, or in some mix. In many cases, there are families that have combined with other families. There have been divorces and remarriages and then kids who are being raised in a variety of different ways. And then 7% of the Jews by religion who have minor children at home are not raising their children Jewish at all. Now, among the Jews of no religion, 8% are raising their children Jewish entirely by religion, some mix, and fully 2/3 are not raising their children Jewish at all. So that obviously raises a question of Jewish continuity. Is this group, which is rising through the generations, again, a third of millennials, 2/3 of them are not raising their children Jewish in any way, not only not in the Jewish faith, but not even as culturally or ethnically Jewish. So it raises the question, will they pass on any Jewish identity? Now, intermarriage is a related phenomenon, and this is a very complicated issue. Exactly how they're related, I'm not even going to try to make that case to you, but I know we can see in our data that people who are intermarried are more likely to be Jews of no religion. Jews of no religion are more likely to intermarry. Exactly what the causal arrows are is very difficult to say, but we do see in our data that among Jews who are married to another Jew, either by religion or of no religion, but married to a fellow Jew, fully 96% are raising their children in the Jewish faith. Among those, and it's very important to see this, see these numbers whole, see the positive, the negative, the full things. I'm not going to talk in normative terms, but for you to see that among Jews who are intermarried in our survey, raising minor children at home, a majority of them are raising their children Jewish in some way. 63% are raising their children. That's why I've blued this bottom line. 20% are raising their children entirely in the Jewish faith and no other faith. An additional 25% are raising their children partly Jewish and partly in the Jewish faith. An additional 16% raising their children either culturally/ethnically but not religiously Jewish or some mix. And 37% not raising their children Jewish in any way. Okay. We also know intermarriage is rising. These numbers have been alluded to already. In recent generations, among Jews overall, 58%, pushing 6 in 10, intermarrying. If we take the Orthodox out of the picture, since there's virtually no intermarriage among the Orthodox, that's how we get to that number of 71 or 72%, it actually rounds to 72%, who since 2000 of non-Orthodox Jews married since 2000, 72% have been marrying non-Jews. Some of those non-Jews, of course, later on convert. But at the time of the survey, this is what they told us. Intermarriage forms a very linear pattern with the major streams of American Jewish life, virtually no intermarriage among the Orthodox. Roughly a quarter of conservative Jews are intermarried. Roughly half of Reform Jews are intermarried. And among those who don't identify with any particular stream of Judaism, roughly 2/3 are intermarried today. Now, what happens when you have rising rates of intermarriage? You get rising numbers of offspring of intermarriage. Fortunately, that's the human condition, right? And if we look at this generationally, we see some very interesting patterns, and I hope you appreciate this. In the silent generation, the vast majority of people who are Jewish, who identify as Jewish, who are in the silent generation, tell us they have 2 Jewish parents. Even in my generation, the baby boomer generation, and my wife's generation, Generation X, roughly speaking, about 3/4 of Jews in those generations have 2 Jewish parents. But in the millennial generation, as many Jews have 1 Jewish parent as have 2. Fully half of Jews in the millennial generation have 1 Jewish parent, not 2. And the reason it doesn't add up to 100% is that there are some true Jews by choice who have no Jewish parents. Now, this is also a really interesting slide, I think, and I hope it's one we can take a moment to digest. The last slide is based on all people who identify as Jewish. This next slide is based on all U.S. adults who have 1 and only 1 Jewish parent, regardless of how they identify today. And what it's telling us is among those over the age of 65 who have 1 and only 1 Jewish parent, the vast majority do not identify as Jewish in any way, as Jews by religion or Jews no religion. In fact, most of those people identify as Christian, 75%. Among Jews between the ages of 50 and 64 who have 1 Jewish parent, roughly speaking, 2/3 do not identify as Jewish. Again, mostly they identify as Christian. Among those between the ages of 30 and 49, 6 in 10 who have 1 Jewish parent do not identify as Jewish. But in the millennial generation, among all U.S. adults under the age of 30 who have 1 and only 1 Jewish parent, the majority do identify as Jewish. About half of them, 29%, as Jews by religion. Judaism is their religion. And about half, 30%, as Jews of no religion. So, what does this mean? Well, I assert to you it's pretty simple. It means that the share of offspring of intermarriage who, as adults, are choosing to identify as Jewish is rising. And you can have a very interesting discussion about why that is, and I don't know for sure. I have some ideas, and we could talk about that, but I want you to see the pattern. One other really interesting bit of data, and this is a new analysis. This wasn't in our 2013 report. That's the first time I've shown this. Among all U.S. adults, again, regardless of how they identify, among all U.S. adults today who have both a Jewish mother and a Jewish father, 3/4 identify as Jews by religion, 11% of Jews of no religion, 88% identify as Jewish in some way. Among those who have a Jewish mother and not a Jewish father, about half identify as Jewish in some way. Among those who have a Jewish father but not a Jewish mother, about 40% identify as Jewish in some way. Now, before you jump to, the mom is more important, let me note that the difference between 47% and 40%, given the margins of error, the sample sizes in this study, is not statistically significant. So I would not tell you that people with a Jewish mother are more likely to identify as Jewish than those with a Jewish father. However, you notice the dark blue number, the 27 and the 15, that difference is statistically significant at a 95% confidence level. So what I'm trying to say is I can reasonably confidently tell you that actually, if you have a Jewish mother and not a Jewish father, you are a little more likely to be a Jew by religion than if you have a Jewish father and not a Jewish mother. Now, in the report that we've released today to the general public, and I hope you'll be reading about it in the press, I think there will be some stories about it, we see a lot of the same patterns among Americans as a whole that we've previously seen that I've shown you among Jews. First of all, just some kind of top-line findings. 21% of American adults today tell us that they were raised in what I'm going to call an interfaith or religiously mixed household. And this is using a fairly conservative definition. So I am not counting a Baptist married to an Episcopalian as a religiously mixed household, but I am counting a Protestant and a Catholic, okay, married or not married, who raise children together. That's religiously mixed. So, and then Protestant and nothing, unaffiliated, or Catholic and Jewish, or any other combination is counting as religiously mixed. So of that 21%, 9% of American adults today tell us that they were raised by two people who were both religiously affiliated but with different groups, again, Protestant, Catholic, or some other combination. And 12% say that they were raised by one person who's religiously affiliated and one who is not. Now, we can also see generationally that the share of American adults who were raised in religiously mixed households is rising through the generations. So this does appear to be a growing phenomenon. Fully a quarter of millennials in the general public tell us that their parents had mixed religious identities. And I do use the word parents. It can be adoptive, can be whatever. Now, what happens with these various combinations? So this is about the way people currently identify depending on how they were raised. And the simple takeaway here is that if you were raised either by a single parent, who almost by definition cannot have multiple religions, or by two parents who were both of the same religion, very high odds, or at least better than half odds, that you are going to have the religion of that group. The same thing is true of Jews. The commensurate figure for Jews is around 3/4 of Jews with two parents, same religion, going to be Jewish. Now, when we look, though, at the more complicated patterns of what happens when somebody had mixed upbringing, if you had both a Protestant parent and a Catholic parent, you're a little more likely to be Protestant today. If you had both a religiously affiliated parent and a religiously unaffiliated parent, you are a little more likely to be religiously affiliated in some way today. Interestingly, if you had a Protestant versus unaffiliated mix, you're a little more likely to be Protestant than if the Catholic, the Protestant gene is a stronger gene, if you will. Most people say that their parents shared equally. So you see the both equally. More than half of Americans who say they were raised by two parents say that the parents played an equal role in their religious upbringing. And if the parents had the same religion, that's the case in 2/3 of the cases. But if the parents had different religions, then there's often a case that the mother played the biggest role. And that's especially the case where you have one parent who's affiliated and one who's unaffiliated. So moms do emerge in the general public, as they do among Jews, as having particular importance. And you see that even more here, that if people come from religiously mixed backgrounds, then it's more likely that they identify with the mother's religion today than with the father's religion. Now, a big reason for that is because the mothers are playing more of a role in the religious upbringing. That's what this second bar is telling us, that in 59% of the cases, the mother, in these mixed cases, the mother is more responsible. In cases in which the father was equally responsible or more responsible, the children are just as likely to have the father's religion as the mother's religion. Overall, in current marriages today in the United States, by this conservative definition that I'm using, fully a quarter of marriages in the United States are religiously mixed. And last slide, I think it'll be of interest, and I did promise Ed and others that if we got to the last slide, there would be sex in it. We asked people what's important, what's most important to a successful marriage. And we see that actually shared religious beliefs is sort of somewhere in the middle of the pack, around there with having children and around the same as having an adequate income, but not as important to most people as sharing household chores or having a satisfying sexual relationship or even having shared interests. And I should note that this is what people tell us is important to them. It isn't necessarily true in the sense that what we can also see in our data and in a different report, we know, for example, in this election, that the vast majority of people who say they support Trump also say their spouse supports Trump. And the vast majority of people who say they support Clinton, the vast majority of say their spouse also supports Clinton. So actually there's a lot or at least there's some evidence that religiously or say politically mixed marriages are not as common as religiously mixed marriages, but nonetheless, when people go to rank these things, that they are more likely to say sex is more important than they are to say that religion is important in their marital life. Thank you very much.